Have you guys ever heard of the word imperialism? Yes? No? Doesn't matter, because today I'm going to be teaching you what that is. But before I begin, let me share with you guys a little story I made up that may or may not have anything to do with this whole subject. You'll find out by the end. It all began long, long ago, like 130 years ago or something like that. There was a time when there once stood an egg. Yeah, we're gonna go with that. An egg. I swear I'm not making this up as I go. This is a real story. Go to any library, you can find a book on this. Anyways, there once stood an egg. And in this egg stood a beautiful creature. Out it came. The young thing decided to give itself the name of Nick. Oh, jeez, it looks hideous. Anyways, time passed by and a bunch of Nicks just started coming out of eggs for some reason. Doesn't really matter. Anyways, I'll just refer to all of them as the Nicks. The Nicks lived in a little place called Africa. And before you start grabbing your pitchforks, no, he lived here because he was born here. There's no race joke here or anything weird about it. Anyways, he lived in Africa. However, he was not alone, he was with all these other Nicks. There were both male and female Nicks, and so you can probably guess how they repopulated. And that's why there's a bunch of Nicks out in Africa now. No reason about it. Continuing on. These Nicks lived peacefully in Africa, and they gathered their own resources, they had their own lives, and they were basically normal human beings. They didn't really interact with the outside world much, but they didn't have to. What they had was enough for them, and they were content with that. So, they were peaceful. Many would even argue that they are doing just fine on their own. However, sadly, that's not exactly what happened, and actually, something pretty terrible happened instead. Before I continue, I have no idea what music to put in this video, so I'm just gonna put some elevator music in there. Have fun. On one random day, the Nicks were greeted by a mysterious being from another world. In came a man, introducing himself as an Amesquin, hailing from the land of Amesquat. It's the orange one. Wait. Oh, that's not. Let me fix that. And there you go. Amesquat. That's where he lived. And anyways, the king of Amesquat basically wanted to take over the land of the Nicks. However, you might say that was their land. But they really had no choice. In this instance, the Nicks were given a choice to say no, but it was kind of hard to say no when a bunch of these Amesquins came in with weapons that could probably destroy them in a couple seconds. So, they had to commit to their ruling, even though it was their rightful land. Now you might be wondering, why the heck would these Amesquins even want to do that? Well, they actually had multiple reasons as to why they wanted to take over this land. For starters, although the Nicks were unaware of this, their land was actually really rich with resources that were pretty inaccessible to them. But the Amesquins were aware of this, and that was basically free money for them if they could get their hands on it. The Amesquins also liked this land because they could use it for military advantages, as well as land for trade ports, which is always good, I guess, but they really didn't need that much more, but whatever, doesn't matter. And lastly, during this time, a bunch of world powers were claiming land from poorer places like Africa. So, if one world power didn't have as much as another, that looked bad on their part, and no one likes to stay behind. The Amesquins also claimed that they were helping these Nicks, however, they didn't do it in the most peaceful way. In fact, they actually forced the Nicks to do things that they didn't want, like learn from a religion that was not theirs. So as you could imagine, eventually the Nicks grew angry. And with this came revolt. This is where the mood shifts. The Nicks gathered together to fight off these Amesquins. I have no idea why there were holes in them, just go with it. So they banded together, grabbed their spears, and prepared for battle. I'd like to say that they victoriously won, however sadly, this story did not end happily. In fact, the Amesquins won the battle quite easily actually. With the snap of a finger, half of the Nicks disintegrated. I mean, the Amesquins pulled out their war machines of death. I don't exactly want to animate a bunch of Nicks being shot, so just use your imagination. With this victory, the Amesquins had nothing to hold them back from continuing to take over this land. And sadly, this is where the story ends. However, the video is not done yet, because now we're going to delve into the different aspects of imperialism. That's right, this video is about imperialism. Did you forget? I kind of did, but that doesn't matter. If you haven't guessed already, this story was actually more real than you'd think. In fact, this really did happen to some people in Africa or other places. I made up the names of Nicks and Amesquins, but really, This is really what happened with other places like Africa when all their land was being stripped away from them. In our example, France was our imperialist power. However, there were actually many more. In fact, alongside France, there was also Britain, Germany, Russia, the Netherlands, and eventually Japan and the US had joined in as well. Although Africa is usually brought up whenever the topic of imperialism comes up, there were also other examples. But let's just focus on Africa. When it comes to Africa, there was essentially a scramble for Africa, as it's actually called. And this is when there was a bunch of different powers that were trying to grab a piece of Africa. However, not all of these powers acted out in the same ways. In fact, there's 4 different types of imperialism. For the purpose of this video, I'll just quickly summarize the 4. Sphere of influence and economic imperialism are essentially done for economic advantages, resources, and trade advantages. There were also protectorates, where a country was essentially taken over. However, they were still allowed to have their own internal government. As a result, protectorates were kind of more on the pacifist side. Unlike these 3 though, the other form of imperialism was colonies. If you hadn't guessed, the Knicks would probably fall into this category. There's also indirect control and direct control. To quickly summarize these 2, indirect control is more like when a colony takes a hands-off approach, while direct control is when a colony is hands-on and essentially just takes over entirely, which, if you haven't guessed already, is exactly what happened in our story. Lastly, I'd like to explain long-term and short-term effects of imperialism, and we'll use our example to explain. For the colonizers, it was pretty much beneficial for them in almost every way. They gained more money from the resources that they're now able to access, they had new trade options, and they were able to use these lands for the purpose of military advantages. But when it comes to the colonized, for example, the Knicks, there were no advantages. One short-term effect is that the Knicks were subjugated to long and hard-working jobs. Jobs like working in a mining facility to provide resources for the Amesquans. The long-term effects are most definitely the worst. Although I may not have covered it, the Knicks did have a very diverse culture. But sadly, once the Amesquans came in, that was all lost, and they were forced to practice and learn whatever the Amesquans told them to. The depopulation of many different groups of people was also an issue. In our instance, many Knicks had lost their lives in the brutal battle that they had once fought. However, additional to this, these Knicks had also been working tirelessly under the Amesquans. They would have to do whatever the Amesquans told them to do, and this was not easy work. As a result, many Knicks did end up losing their lives over the years. To wrap things up, imperialism only benefited the colonizers. For those that were the colonizees, they were sadly subjugated to lots of pain and suffering. Although some instances of imperialism may not have been as brutal as this, there were many instances that were just like this. And sadly, this did in fact happen. That'll be the end of this video, and I hope you enjoyed my little story. Thank you for watching.